Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be. My name is Scott, and with me today, as always, is Trina Paulus, author of Hope for the Flowers. And we have kind of a very special between Thanksgiving and Christmas uh, edition of our weekly show today, where Trina and I, but it'll mostly be Trina, will pontificate about the affairs of the world and not going and taking a really deep dive, but more or less a survey of where we are, the good and the bad, and unfortunately the ugly. Or maybe I should put it this way: the good and unfortunately the bad and the ugly. So, hi, Trina. This is going to be quite a ride that we're going to be on today, isn't it?
Yes, Scott, we agreed before we started that we just see where it goes. And we hope to hear from any of you watching your thoughts about it because we're asking how we should go on and what the purpose of this 15 minutes is. I've learned a lot doing it, and I'm seeking for the way to continue. And Scott has been just as you can see in his spirit, the biggest support to have somebody have such a support is pretty
Yeah.
marvelous in their life. So thank you, Scott. I'm sitting here a bit discouraged. I'm discouraged very much about the situation with the continual slaughter that's going on and the the whole thing with and the West Bank as well as with Gaza right now. That seems to be taken for granted by lots of people, and it goes on and on. And people are buried under rubble, even if there's a short. Scott, you were saying it's not called a truce. It's what. So we're just waiting a while with some exchange of a few prisoners, and then we'll go back to bombing again. And that's considered possible and moral in this day and age, and we've forgotten our humanity and the killing of people just outright. Scott, this is probably the most horrible thing for me to think about. There's a lot of other things that are going on, and at the same time, we're thinking about Christmas, and many of us had the joy of family, of Thanksgiving, and beautiful food, all that wonderful good stuff. And how do we put it together in our single lives, our single human lives, and live with these contradictions that are real in our world today, and the censorship and the cut down of free speech, so that you can't hear two sides or three sides or four sides of a question and see what you think is the right thing, but you're told you have to believe a certain way. These are the things that make me sad right now that I'm sharing with you. So, Scott, do you have any words of wisdom?
Well, I don't know about words of wisdom, but I know that you have struck the chord and the core for not hundreds, not thousands, not tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but literally millions of people. I mean, based on your your book Hope for the Flowers, for which you've sold, how many copies in the last 50
At,
years?
at least 44 million in English, plus an unknown number in other languages.
And there are just people in especially South Korea and in the Philippines and other countries as well, who it's a national treasure because it was taught in the school systems, and so many people have fashioned their entire life about and through the underlying principles that you captured with the what would you call it, a metaphor, an alleg
I
of
don't I don't
hope
know
and strife.
I don't know how God gave me that grace to use a metaphor that's so universal. Most
And
metaphors are kind of limited, but this one, caterpillars and butterflies, is pretty all over the world. Don't you think,
And
Scott?
yeah, well, obviously the proof is in the pudding, and so many people have said that it's been so life transforming for them. But there is an underlying thought or principle, or there's something there that it's alluding to, and it troubles me that during this time, and it seems to be accelerating to me, and I think most people feel that things are happening more rapidly and at a greater velocity nowadays. That violates that underlying principle that you were trying to get to. So it makes me sad that you're discouraged, but on the other hand, you show a way forward for at least people to be able to manage their own. You can't manage the world, but you can manage yourself. So what
Well,
do you have to say? What do you
that
have to say about that,
it's
Trina?
pretty hard to manage yourself, I think, Scott, don't you think sometimes? And um, I think it might be the day to tell a rather more extended story about my relationship with Bill Hanna of Hanna-Barbera. Bill he's dead now, but he was such a gentle, wonderful person that I had the privilege of knowing. He reached out to me because he wanted to make Hope for the Flowers the next Charlotte's Web for Hanna-Barbera. And so he actually did a 20-page proposal, and he wrote 5 songs which he had orchestrated at Hanna-Barbera Studios, and he sent them to me on a tape. And they were all lovey-dovey songs. He saw it as a love story between Stripe and Yellow, the 2 caterpillars, which it is, of course. That's true. And as a parable, you can't deny it. But when you think of a movie being made and the importance of it, you want it to be kind of the whole picture. So I remember being with my little boy, just turning 5, on the shores of Provincetown there on the Cape, writing 5 more songs. And one of them was I called the Pillar Song, which I sang in a gravelly voice. And I gave those to Bill Hanna. And 3 of us women and my son at the age of 5 went out, and I rented a house near Hanna-Barbera studio. And we went and worked there every day. And we found out that we were expected to find the sponsors of it. Now, none of us had ever done anything like that before. And apparently other things were happening behind the scenes. Like, it wasn't a slam dunk that this was going to go ahead. So Bill had to take pictures that he had someone make there in the studio to go to the Procter & Gamble headquarters to see if they could get sponsorship by Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati. Well, that didn't work, so we had to try to get our sponsors. And we had a contract and everything, but it wasn't signed. So we went out there like that, thinking it was going to happen. And every once in a while, Bill would take us out for lunch, the 3 of us women, to a lovely little simple looking but nice quality dining place. And one time, this wonderful gentleman hit his hand on the table. Trina, I don't know what one man's greed means another man's need has to do with Hope for the Flowers. That's a pretty important line that I had in one of my songs, in the Pillar Song. One man's greed means another man's need. When you think of climbing on the pillar, every time you climb on something, you squash the other one down and you get to the top. That's one man's greed causes another man's need. They don't get up. And in human life, they maybe don't get fed, or they're starved. And a part that I think a lot of people, when they read this book or see it, they kind of miss the importance of when you get to the pillar, you're there for maybe a minute or 5 minutes or a day or 2. And then there's somebody else, another layer, pushing you right off, and you fall down, so off of the pillar, and you die. You die as a caterpillar without ever becoming your true self. And unless you crawl off your pillar, and we're different than caterpillars and butterflies. This only happens once in one life cycle, that they enter the chrysalis or the cocoon, which means the same thing, but it works different physically. I think you know a little bit, P.S., about that. If a cocoon, it means it wraps itself around with silk, like a silkworm. And most butterflies don't make cocoons. Most moths do, but some butterflies do make cocoons. I looked that up before I did the book. So, because cocoon has more of a speaks to the human experience more than chrysalis does. A chrysalis is different. Like the monarchs make this chrysalis. They eat and eat and eat, and they change their coats 5 times. The coats are what held their insides together. At a certain point, they stop eating. Then they crawl around a while, and they find someplace high to climb up, and they then weave a little bit of a little nub around the top of wherever they are, and then they hang down for about a day, like a jay with their head at the bottom. And then at a certain moment, usually in the morning, it splits down at the bottom of their head, and the old coat just rolls up, and they wiggle and wiggle and wiggle, and you think they're going to fall off. And they wiggle and wiggle and wiggle. And that old coat most of the time does fall off, and sometimes it just stays up there but doesn't do anything. And they become this beautiful jade jewel-like thing with gold spots on it. I think that's why they're called monarchs. So we have that reality of them having it just once. Now, for human beings, now we're not butterflies or caterpillars, really. I think we all have our pillars, and we have them all the time. Maybe mine's trying to do good. Maybe yours is somewhat the same, but we have to always look to see what we need to change in our life and to crawl off. And this time of year, in my tradition, of Catholic tradition, is a time of Advent. That means the coming in history, mystery, and majesty of the Messiah, of Jesus, in our case. And we're starting into Advent, the end of the year, from a liturgical point of view. And it's a time of waiting, pregnancy, expectation. So I know I'm mixing a bunch of things together, but things are pretty much mixed together. So it's a time of hope and quiet action and facing the dark. I don't know how you are these days, but I'm in the northern hemisphere right now, and it seems to be dark so early and so late. And in a way, I just can't wait for the light to come again. And getting warmer, and it's just getting colder. And I have such cold feet and hands personally that I find it a hard time of year, and probably you do too. And there is such a thing as a seasonal affective disorder that has to do with light and not getting enough sun. So this is the time of year we're at physically, and probably the time of year we're at spiritually. And that's probably what's plaguing me with this sense of the chaos in the world. And yes, God, I am grateful for hope being able to reach out and cross so many places. And I'm so glad you picked up on the theme that's so close to me right now. Radical sharing, freely chosen. Now, I don't think caterpillars freely choose it. In my book, they do. They do choose. But in reality, I don't think they have much choice. But we do. We can get off our pillars and keep trying and recognizing that none of us is perfect in this life.
And based upon, what you've said just now, I take it that whereas caterpillars have one chance at quote unquote getting it right, we humans are blessed by having, if at first you don't succeed, try again. Is that true?
Yes, as long as they get the sense that they have to get off that pillar. Like Stripe, Yellow took it. She got off once and she stayed off. She didn't know what she was supposed to do next. Stripe couldn't stand it, that he didn't know what was at the top. So he went back on the craziness, and he was almost one of those that got to the very top. Not quite, because Yellow had gone ahead and risked for a butterfly and inspired him. They couldn't talk to each other at that point. But there was something about this butterfly and the look of it and her efforts to pull him off, which he knew he shouldn't do. He just knew enough that his karma meant he had to turn around and go down. He had that much of a sense. And we hope that everybody in the world, even the most vicious crawlers, have that something inside them that can inspire them to turn around and crawl off their pillar and become their full, beautiful self and realize they have enough and share it radically, and not just little bits, but share it radically. What do these very, very rich billionaires need a bit more for? They don't. They don't. And what a difference it would make if they would totally share. And if we didn't have a military industrial complex calling the shots for us and power hungry people choosing to live by that power. I don't know, Scott, but it's not easy. These are interior spiritual decisions that everybody has to make.
Well, with that, I think what you have actually done, we didn't exactly know how this was going to end up, but you have actually provided uh, a lot of the first word of your book, hope. Despite all of the things that we seem to be seeing that are going on and at an accelerated pace, there still is hope, isn't there?
Yes, and we need to believe that somehow we are made for these times. This isn't accidental that we're here right now. And
Somehow we are made for these times.
yes, and that we need to find our little communities and our bigger ones. And for instance, I'm very happy that I know Gary Knoll for so many years. He's pretty solid. That's Null, by the way. I went on his Gary Knoll website and yeah, you can get his broadcasts, and they just went on right after another, and they were pretty good. I'm also on Russell Brand, who's a very fragile leader, and they've demonetized him on YouTube and brought back his promiscuous past, which he is very open about. He knows it, but he's over 20 years now in free from drugs and helping other people do it. And I find there's a fragility in him. He's a very different style than I am, folks, if you ever go on and listen to him. But his push for community is so beautiful that I'm really appreciative being on his community, in his community. So these are some of the people. There are more people I could talk about beautifully too. And maybe I should. Maybe that's one of the things to do is talk about more of the people who inspire me right now. But those are two of them.
Well, you're one of the people who inspires me, and if they inspire you, you meaning the people who are listening or watching right now, go ahead and visit hopefortheflowers.com and navigate to contacts, and go ahead and contact Trina Paulus, and we would be very interested to hear what you have to say as well.
And that could be either on Facebook through the Hope for the Flowers Revolution, if you choose to join that group, or on the YouTube channel. And the YouTube channel is rather strange if you don't get the link that Scott provides or get back on this one, because it's not the obvious Hope for the Flowers YouTube channel. We don't know what to do about that. That's one of the things we have to try to iron out. Okay. So thanks a lot. Thank you. And thank you, Scott.
And thank you, Trina.
Thank you.